Hey, it is episode 5 of series 3, which means we, one more time, are going to try to kill the 5-paragraph essay right after the theme song. All right, everybody, we are killing the 5-paragraph essay one more time. If you did not watch the previous attempted murder of the 5-paragraph essay, I'm going to link to it below. It was series 2, episode 5. And this was essentially my complaint about the 5-paragraph essay then. The 5-paragraph essay, especially the 5-paragraph persuasive essay, it's rigid, it's inflexible, it's unnatural. It seems to have been invented by people who do not write. No writers use that format, and it seems to be employed often by people who don't want to or don't know how to or aren't sure how to. Let students write with their own voice and with their own style, and to write in a way that makes sense for those students' individual arguments. So it may surprise you to hear me say this next sentence, which is this: there is some merit to the underlying structure that is used in a 5-paragraph essay. And it's what we call the classical argument structure. This is not to be confused with the classic style that I talked about back in episode 1 of this series, but it's the classical argument structure because it was first articulated, first outlined, first written down by this guy, Aristotle, who is, of course, you remember from all of your philosophy classes, an ancient Greek philosopher. And he's the one who wrote down a lot of the stuff that the Greeks did really well, because the Greeks 2,500 years ago did a lot of things well. They did tragedy very well. They did comedy very well. They did democracy medium well. I mean, really well for the time, but compared to today, well, not really, because there's only white men and they still had slavery. Women weren't allowed to do it. Anyway, but Aristotle documented in his writing what it was that made ancient Greek speeches awesome. That's right, I said speeches. Ancient Greece, even though by Aristotle's generation there were a lot of literate people who could read and who could write, including, of course, Aristotle, because he wrote all this stuff down, ancient Greek civilization at that time was still almost entirely pre-literate. Your average Greek did not read, did not write. So when there were issues of the day, when there were elections to be had, when there were big decisions to be made, people would gather in the town square or in the marketplace. And this is true worldwide. I'm not just being Eurocentric here. I'm talking about Aristotle because, we named the classical argument structure because of how he wrote it. But around the world, in pre-literate societies, every town, every city, every village had a square because people would go there and they would listen to speakers. In pre-literate societies, that's how stuff got done. And in fact, this classical argument structure that Aristotle outlined 2,500 years ago was really useful for more than 2,000 years. Because, even though Gutenberg popularized the printing press in a date that I am not currently remembering, but I'm going to write it right here at some point in the post-production so I don't feel stupid. Gutenberg popularized the printing press and literacy became possible for many, many more people. Still, even to 100 or 200 years ago in places all around the world, literacy was restricted to the very few. So being able to make a good speech was really, really important. And that's what Aristotle was talking about when he outlined the classical argument structure. And because the 5-paragraph essay somewhat reflects that structure, this will sound familiar to you. In an Aristotelian argument, the first thing you do is you lay out the reasons why an argument has to be made. What is the problem? Then you state your solution and the evidence for your solution being correct. Then you address the counterclaims. What are the people on the other side saying? And then you tell those people on the other side This is why my idea is superior. And then you wrap up with an exhortation or a call to action for your audience, the people who are listening to you, to do something. And it works really well. And you look at famous speeches throughout history. You can go to the really short Gettysburg Address. You could go to the medium long I Have a Dream speech from Dr. King. You can go to the really long, like I would recommend Towards a More Perfect Union by Barack Obama. That was from 2008 and during the campaign. All of those speeches really follow this structure. And it's because listeners do not have the luxury of pausing and going back to reread something you said previously. And as the world became more literate, it became more obvious to people who wrote for a living that you were no longer tied down to an argument structure that privileges listeners. That you could instead use an argument structure that privileges readers, and you could take advantage of having your words on the page for your readers to go back and look at. That's what I mean when I say the 5-paragraph essay based on a good idea, but it's a good idea that hasn't been necessary for, at least in this country, 100 or more years. So if we're not using the classical argument structure anymore, what are we doing? I recommend an argument structure that goes 180 degrees from the way Aristotle outlined it. It's called an inductive argument method. There's a later series on arguments coming where we will talk more about logic and the difference between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Just rest assured that if you have a question about it, it is answerable, but I'm not going to get into it right now. I'm just going to say this is an inductive argument structure. And the way this works is instead of opening with your answer, you just admit that there is a question. That question could have many different answers. Your answer could be among those many different answers that you list at the beginning of your essay, or you can just keep your answer close to the vest. You don't have to reveal your position in the opening paragraphs. You can instead just simply say, hey, there is this question. And let me give you an example of why this question is important. And then, because your readers have all of the powers that readers do to go back and look at something instead of trying to hold an idea in their mind, you can walk the readers through something and you can trust that they're going to follow it. Now, I was using as a mentor text in episodes 2, 3, and 4 of this series, A Presumption of Guilt by Bryan Stevenson, which is a great essay, and it is a fantastic model of that classical argument structure. You might remember when I talked about claim, we noticed that his claim was at the beginning of his, not in the first paragraph. He did not write a 5-paragraph persuasive essay, but his claim came at the end of his first section. He followed it up then with evidence and warrants, and he ended with a strong call to action and a very nice return to the anecdote that he had used to open his essay. I mean, if I had to pick a more perfect example of how the classical argument structure could look, it would be hard to do so. It was absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to show you a different mentor text. And this is a text by Emily Mills. She's a friend of mine. She writes for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And I'm going to put her opening section up on the screen. Here we go. Okay, you'll see that I cut off the title, which is okay. Emily Mills does not write the titles. Most people who write for newspapers don't actually write their own titles. It's a big secret. I just let it out of the bag. Actually, it's not that big of a secret. Pretty much anyone will tell you. But look at how she starts. She starts by saying, there's a budget problem here in Wisconsin. There's an impasse over a lot of different things. And then you get to her third paragraph. So already we're not feeling like this is a 5-paragraph persuasive essay, look at the way her third paragraph goes. Put it up big again, please. Right towards the middle, she says, when it comes to transportation, though, the topic has proved so thorny that there had been talk of separating it from the state budget entirely. Governor Scott Walker put the kibosh on that idea, however, so here we are. And this is the part that I've highlighted: how to adequately fund projects to update our infrastructure. So just like I told you, she opens her argument not with her claim, but rather with, hey guys, there's this open question. There's this problem that needs some solutions. And in an inductive argument outline, the next thing you do after you pose this question or articulate this question or acknowledge that there is this question that needs some solutions, the next thing you do is you start naming evidence. I'm going to skip a couple of her paragraphs, but put up another one on the screen right here. Look at what she writes here in the highlighted part. Heavy trucks, as in 18-wheelers, are responsible for the lion's share of the damage to our highways and interstates, blah, 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 blah. In fact, a single 80,000-pound truck does more damage to roads than 5,000 cars. Now, the reason why she mentions this, and she uses a statistic, she uses some data, is because she is easing her readers into her worldview. The inductive argument outline, to be successful, relies on you beginning your evidence section with stuff that everyone can kind of agree on. Consensus evidence, if you will. You can then lead your readers later to some more controversial evidence. But what I like about the inductive outline and why it can be such a powerful tool, especially if you're making an argument that has some controversy to it, is that you don't begin by immediately alienating your readers. You want your readers on your side for as long as possible before you hit them with the idea that they might not like. So, consensus evidence, here's a fact: trucks make damage, and trucks do more damage than cars. I'm going to skip a couple more paragraphs and put up another section from Mills's text right here. Again, I want you to look at the section that I've highlighted. I've linked to this text so you can read the whole thing down in the description. But here, look at the highlighted section. She says, if trucking companies want to be able to do their jobs and get goods from one place to another safely and in due time, then it's in their best interest to do their part to see that the state's infrastructure is properly or appropriately funded. Paying a per mile fee seems like an easy, good faith way to do that, and money earned back in time and vehicle wear and tear saved by having those better roads. So you see what she's done there. She's gone from the consensus evidence to, okay, now I'm going to start challenging the people who might disagree with me, but I'm going to do it in a way that makes them feel good about my position. And here Mills is doing that. The trucking companies have one goal in mind, and that's to get their stuff from one place to another and get paid for it. So she says quite simply, if you trucking companies were willing to pay a tax that would help maintain our roads, you would win, because your trucks would have less wear and tear on them because there are fewer potholes, and you'd be able to get things there as quickly as you need to. So, to kind of summarize where we are, an inductive outline begins with statement of a problem, then it moves to some consensus evidence, and then some slightly more challenging evidence, which might be a response to a counterclaim. And now we're going to sum up. We're going to get to the end of Mills's text, and we'll talk about how an inductive outline ends. One more time, I'm putting some paragraphs up on the screen. She says, I can honestly see no other good way forward than the heavy truck fee. This is her claim. She has saved her claim for the end of her essay. And that's what I mean when I say an inductive argument turns the traditional or the classical argument structure 180 degrees upside down. The claim comes at the very, very end. And so, we can add to our previous list, number 4, the claim. That's what makes an inductive outline so much smarter, from my point of view as a teacher, than a classical argument outline. The inductive argument outline acknowledges that your reader isn't just an anonymous face in the crowd listening to a speech, but is an active participant in the writer-reader relationship. And you treat that reader well by giving that reader consensus evidence and telling that reader that that reader is not wrong to believe their counterclaim. But you also very carefully lead them along to your conclusion and your claim at the end of the text. Okay, just time for a couple of quick postscripts here at the end of this series. Postscript number 1, I'm going to give to Steven Pinker. There's a link in the description below to a talk he gave. It's about an hour long. I find it fascinating. I've watched it like 15 or 20 times. You may never make it all the way through it because we are different people and we have different tastes, and that's okay. But Pinker is talking about that classic style where you are writing as clearly and unambiguously as possible to an audience who probably knows less than you think they know. And one thing he says in that presentation is that bad writers start with their conclusion and then work backwards to try to justify it with causes. That's the classical argument structure. Good writers, he says, acknowledge what the reader can do and lead the reader carefully and at a pace that is appropriate for this reader-writer interaction. Lead the readers to the conclusion by outlining the causes first. And that is the inductive argument structure. I will link to the inductive argument outline that I like to use with my classes. That'll be down below. But I want to add this second postscript, and this one may kind of blow your mind. As much as the inductive argument structure is 180 degrees from the classical argument structure, we may be approaching a point in human history where we want to go all the way back around. We want to go 360 degrees. It's this. Right now, we are living in a world where speaking, again, is about to supplant reading. For the 20th century, much of the 19th century, as literacy became widespread, there was a real democratization of literacy and a real democratization of argument, a real more democracy in the way people could communicate with each other. As more people learned how to read, more people were writing for more audiences. And I'm talking about everything from small community newspapers to fanzines that would be printed in somebody's basement on a mimeograph. You guys, you never heard of mimeographs, and they were the greatest thing ever, I assure you. Find them, YouTube search them, you can see it. And then, once the 90s hit and there was an actual World Wide Web, there were sites like LiveJournal. As shortly after that, there was blogging and Facebook, which allowed people to write to each other, and then microblogging like on Twitter. And there was not just a democratization, but a massive democratization of literacy. That you can go to times in recent history, world history, like the Arab Spring, and you can realize that those were all made possible because the tools of democratic writing were in the hands of everybody. That's why China right now blocks sites like Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp. They don't want that communication, that literacy, I can write, you can read. They don't want that to be so available. Democratization of literacy for some governments is bad. But here's what this does. This not only holds the Facebook and the Twitter and allows you to write in a very democratic and democratized way, it also has a very good camera. And even though this is I'm rocking the 5, shut up. There's not a lot of memory here. There is a ton of cheap or free memory on the cloud. You know what? I'm stealing this idea from Clive Thompson, so I'm going to put a picture of his book and a link to it below. But basically, the ubiquity of cameras, the cheapness of memory to store photos and videos, and even now with things like Facebook Live and Twitter Live, at any given moment, I have some statistics, and you're going to see me look at my cue card because that's where my statistics are. Any given minute, there are 300 hours of video being uploaded to YouTube. There is 1 billion hours of daily viewing on YouTube and 500 million hours worth of viewing every day on Facebook. At any given second, there are thousands or tens of thousands of people who are live on Facebook or live on Twitter and broadcasting. Plus you figure whatever it is that's happening on the Instachats or Snapgrams or these other things that I don't know anything about. Speech is coming back. And it may be that this inductive structure that works so well in a setting where you have a reader who can follow along with the writer as the writer guides them to a conclusion, that may all be disappearing. The democratization of writing is going to fade because we are bringing back democratization of speech. And when that happens, you can go back to the classical argument structure. Aristotle was right. It works really well for speeches. But for now, I'll see you for the next one. All right, take 11 to whatever, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to get it this time.